Hello, I'm Garrett Kopp, and I've made it a mission to understand wild chaga and share its benefits with the world. For nearly 10 years, I've been building Birch Boys. I've taken my passion for chaga and built Birch Boys into the largest vertically integrated provider of premium wild harvested organic chaga. I continue to connect with our inspiring network of customers, and every time I do, I'm reminded that you are some of the most down-to-earth, optimistic, healthy, and intelligent people I've ever met. I'm blessed to have you in my life. I've always had a connection to the woods. To me, the forest has always been a place where I felt at home, a place where no matter what was going on in my life at the time, I could always find peace within the woods. I often wonder how chaga will be used in the future, but right now, many of you ask, does chaga in the wild have a future?
When we started in chaga, we never knew just how complex and complicated land management would be and how crucial its role is in the future of wild chaga. We knew that the practices in forestry were not kind to chaga, but we could never have imagined just how destructive they can be. We sat down to speak with Paul Thomas. Paul worked in the lumber industry for years. Now recently, Paul has been a wild chaga harvester who has seen it all when it comes to harvesting chaga in nature.
Well, the hardest part is physically demanding. A week ago, there was so much snow. It was so hard to walk through the snow. I mean, and if you add 100 pounds of chaga on your back, I climb the trees a lot of times, and sometimes you're getting 40 or 50 feet up in the air. And that's a lot of work also, and it's dangerous on top of that.
How much sheer distance would you say that you're covering?
3-4 miles. On average, sometimes more. Sometimes it almost seems like a good idea to leave it and come back for it later, but I don't ever leave it. I always just tough it out.
It's too high to get.
There's no such thing. If it's worth, if it's a mature piece, I'm going to get it.
Among loggers and foresters, what percentage of them around here would you say are aware of chaga?
Maybe 50%. They say they know what it is until they point it out to you, and it's not even close.
Paul showed us that a lack of awareness around chaga might be part of the problem. But still, we wanted to dig deeper and get to the bottom of this and see where the real problem lies.
Modern logging is not as beneficial to the land as older cut by hand jobs. The modern logging is the tree gets cut and it puts in a pile and the whole pile goes out, and whatever tops are left get put back in the trail to stop from the machines hurting the ground so bad or filling in mud holes or whatnot. Whereas like prior to 2000, there was not a lot of mechanized logging. So there's a lot of guys with chainsaws, and you would cut the tree down and then walk down the tree and cut all the limbs off, and you'd leave that there for the deer to eat to the tops. And in them tops rot into the ground and it creates new soil. Whereas the modern logging is not like that, because everything goes.
What is this scooter? Can you just try and explain that?
It's a big 4 or 6-wheeled machine that has huge tires on it, a big grapple on the back of it, picks up the trees and drags them out of the woods.
When Paul was working as skidder, he brought Garrett Records' amount of chaga, and Garrett always wondered just how he could have possibly be finding that much chaga all at once.
It was on the trees that I was dragging out, basically, the trees that were cut.
How much chaga do you think you found for that particular job?
800 pounds.
So, do you think that is going on right now where people just aren't bringing?
Oh, absolutely. They're just not putting in the effort to look for it.
Is there a way to educate people of the value so this chaga doesn't go to waste in the process of logging?
But you'd have to work with the timber company to have them give you a heads up before they're going to cut a certain piece of property so that you could go and harvest it or send somebody to go harvest it. If you attempted to, approach the contractor that's, owns a logging company and said, hey, could you save the chaga for me? He's gonna laugh at you. If you tell your crew, hey, if you see this stuff, save it, it's gonna cause a problem. The only thing I can come up with is to work with a timber company and have them notify you ahead of time. They can let you know. Once they cut the trees, you're not gonna find it.
After our interview with Paul, we were shocked. We wanted to know more. We wanted to see what could be done and how Wild Chaga can be better understood. We sat down with Garrett Kopp from Birch Boys, and we hope to get some answers to these deep questions about Chaga's future.
So I learned about chaga when I was 15 from my grandmother. I used to mow lawns when I was a teenager to make extra money, and I did that for my grandma. And one day after mowing her lawn, I was really thirsty, so I came in to get a drink, and she had this jug. It was a pitcher, actually, of what looked like iced tea in her fridge. So I poured myself a cup of it, I drank it, and she happened to be walking into the kitchen as I was drinking the tea, and she thought it was an absolute riot that I was drinking chaga. And she had just learned about chaga. So this was her first time picking the fungus on her own in her backyard. She had just learned about it on a trip she was on in Maine, and she had been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, so that's why she got interested in chaga. And it just kind of became something fun. It was really her passion about it that was kind of contagious for me. And then I started seeing chaga in the woods with me, or in the woods everywhere I went. And so naturally I would pick it for her, and that's how I got into picking chaga. And I call it Birch Boys just because I used to actually harvest with a friend of mine, and or several friends of mine, really. It was kind of a fun thing to do. And my grandma actually is the one that got us going to farmers markets. So she used to knit different scarves and mittens, pot holders, things like that. And she would go with the old ladies at the Tupper Lake Adult Center to these different craft fairs and festivals to sell them. And they kind of snuck me in to sell chaga. And I made like $300, and we met a lot of cool people. And I just kept doing it because then, it was more money than I was making from mowing lawns. So, and that's how I got into it, actually. But quickly I realized that there was a big discrepancy between what I was seeing online in terms of chaga being this rare, diamond of the forest, it was called, and I was seeing it everywhere. I mean, I found it on my own for the first time looking for birch bark to start a fire, and it was like a rainy day, so it was kind of wet, and I knew birch bark burns when it's wet. I was looking at this birch tree picking bark, and right in front of my face there was this big piece of chaga. And so I picked it, and I had like 30 pounds of it. I showed my grandma, and I think the reason that we have such an abundance of chaga in the Adirondacks is because of two things. We have an abundance of freshwater systems, so rivers, creeks, streams, ponds. That is like the fuel, like the blood life of fungi. So even like humidity and fog in the morning, that is so important, I think. And then we also have a very diverse population of birch trees. We have Betula papyrifera, Betula alleganiensis, white birch trees, and yellow birch trees. And that creates a dynamic chaga habitat. On the private land, there's a lot of large tracts of land that are owned by timber companies or land management companies. And we're fortunate to lease 220,000 acres of privately owned land for fungi harvesting. But we interface with logging all the time because logging companies also lease that land. So I've noticed over time, this isn't something that I knew when I got started, but I learned a lot from the people that I work with for harvesting and from the loggers and the foresters. I don't really know what the current factors are for how foresters are making those decisions, but I know that right now the selective timber harvesting protocols are to cut any yellow birch tree 8 inches or over in diameter. And so I don't really think that is a conservation done well. When I look at yellow birch trees as being a critical source of life for not only chaga, but also a lot of other organisms, a lot of animals den in yellow birch trees, and particularly those affected by fungi that are softened and have that tree rot. But this is looked at by the field of conservation in modern forestry as just a tree rot disease or fungal pathogens, basically. I don't even like the term conservation so much, because I think that I associate conservation with what is being taught in the mainstream. And honestly, to me, it is looking at fungi in a very, very archaic way, an outdated way. They look at it as a disease to the forest. That basically, that is how you're taught about these things in a forestry school. And actually you can look it up. The U.S. Forest Service would consider chaga the clinker polypore. It's a fungal pathogen. Stewardship is the word that comes to mind. I think that to properly steward the land, we need a more well-rounded approach. And I would argue that it actually could potentially be more profitable, because you look at the overhead, you look at the machinery, you look at the manpower it actually takes to go through the forest and take out these old growth trees. I mean, you're talking millions and millions of dollars in overhead. Like, the nice thing about harvesting chaga is, like, you can go in with a pack basket and a hatchet and you can yield, enough product to make products, right, and to actually help people in a meaningful way. So I'm not saying that logging isn't important. I'm not saying that conservation is, totally wrong. I think that just fungi are looked at in a very ignorant way. Like, we have this very limited view of fungi. It's not just chaga, really. We're just warming up to fungi as a culture in America, and I think part of that is because we didn't really grow up on our land. We don't have a rich cultural history of using mushrooms, but I do think that history exists. I personally spent a lot of solitary time in nature as a kid. That I built a lot of my understanding of the world through nature and through experiences alone in the woods. And I've learned a lot from that. My family also, I come from a bloodline on each side of my family of outdoors people. So there's a lot of ways that people connect with the forest. Sometimes that's hunting, sometimes that's fishing, sometimes that's even my grandfather trapping. But I think that what's common is just that connection to nature. It's cool knowing, I guess, that my ancestors may have walked by these same trees. And my great-grandfather Morris, the father of my grandma Sally, who taught me about chaga, my Mimi, he actually died frozen solid to a birch tree with a mink and a muskrat in his pack basket as he was checking his trap line. And he died. He had a coronary thrombosis, and he just kind of grabbed onto this birch tree for support, and it dropped in temperature, and he froze to the tree. So a game warden and his friend Antoine Lapierre found him at 1 a.m. and they actually had to cut down the tree, pull him home over a frozen Rollins Pond in a toboggan. And it's just crazy to know that I've picked chaga. Actually, that's where I was looking for birch bark to start a fire at Fish Creek Campground that very first day when I saw the chaga right next to my face. So I don't know. I try not to think too much about that, but it's a unique thing to know that the forest here, if they had eyes, they would have seen my grandfather, and then they would have seen me and everything that came in between, So I look at the trees in the forest as literally a source of knowledge and like history. Well, I think you have to look again at the duality of the private land ownership and the state-owned land here in the Adirondacks, because on the state forest, these trees will be allowed to live, they will continue to grow old, so basically you're not really supposed to pick up a rock and leave the woods with it under the principles of leave no trace. I personally feel like, we're meant to participate in nature. It's not like leave no trace, it's like leave a profoundly positive trace. That I think is like what humans are for. There's a lot of negativity when we talk about how we interface with nature, but I really think that like we're supposed to be the keepers of the land. But then there's also the private land model, which a lot of these trees are just going to be cut and taken and sold for firewood, pulp and paper products, made into veneer, whatever commercial use that you can find and extract from it, they will do, and then it will be gone, and then either those land parcels will be logged again, and those trees won't be allowed to grow that old again, or they'll be sold to the state and the resource will be locked up forever.
Garrett saw the misconceptions surrounding chaga, and he knew that getting the truth and information out would be vital to raise awareness.
First misconception about chaga. Chaga is not a mushroom. Despite the fact that every time you see the word chaga listed online, the word mushroom almost always follows, it's true, chaga is not a mushroom. Let's start with what is a mushroom. A mushroom is defined as the reproductive organ of a fungus. It makes spores. It's the spore-bearing fruit of a fungus. They pop up from time to time when the conditions are right, when the mycelium is grown, and there's enough moisture in the air to produce this fruiting body to spread spores. One fungus may produce tens, if not hundreds of mushrooms throughout its lifetime. While all mushrooms come from fungi, not all fungi produce mushrooms. Chaga, the conch that actually grows out of the sides of birch trees that we harvest and make tea out of, that's actually a fungal organ known as a sclerotia, an aerial sclerotia. A sclerotia is defined as an immune mechanizing source of micronutrients and the control center of defense for the fungus. And it's an organ that's specific to parasitic fungi like chaga, who are actually growing on a living birch tree and killing that birch tree, because the birch tree is sending its own immune responses to the chaga. It's trying to heal itself and it's trying to dispel the chaga. And so the fungus that actually occupies the birch trees develops chaga, the sclerotia, as fungal armor. It is a source of compounds that it uses to protect itself from the birch tree. And ironically, that's why it's so good for us.
In order for Inonotus obliquus to reproduce, it must kill the tree. Chaga is basically a source of nutrients that it uses to kill the tree. It kills the tree slowly over time by decaying the tree's sapwood. In doing this, cracks form in the tree's wood, which Inonotus obliquus will flood with mycelium, and once its reproductive fruiting body is ready to produce spores, it will swell these cracks with mycelium in order to split open the tree in vertical sections along the tree trunk, and behind these peeling plates of bark on the now dead host tree, Inonotus obliquus will unveil its porous and spore-bearing fruiting body in a dramatic murder-suicide that produces billions of spores. This is the fruiting body of chaga. What it is a poroid. It's technically a mushroom. It's spore-bearing, but it's more of a porous surface that once was the tree's sapwood. And that's only after the chaga kills the birch tree that it's able to do this. It does it 1 year after it kills the birch tree. So the chaga, which is on this side, the sclerotia, this is like a very small young piece of chaga, and it was able to kill this birch tree. That happened last year, and this year it has reproduced. After this, it will be done, and the birch polypores and the other fungi will take it away and decompose it back to the earth. Wow, look at the edge of it. This is chaga's mushroom. As weird as that is to say. It can be very, very subtle. It makes me wonder how many of these I've walked by for years having no idea what they even were. This is just like a very lucky situation. We can actually take this whole thing with us and collect the spores and look at it under a microscope. There's so much chaga in here that honestly, it's probably a better thing to take this and spread it to areas where there's not chaga than to leave it here where there's already plenty of chaga. So this is just awesome. It literally feels like God and Mother Nature have conspired to help us today. As you can see up there, there was a big piece of chaga and it either fell or it was picked. But this is what the chaga does at the end of its life. It kills the tree, it rips open the bark in a vertical way all throughout the tree's trunk, and then it reveals the chaga poroid. It's also sometimes called a hymenium. A poroid, a fruiting body, a hymenium, that's all the same thing. This is an inactive chaga fruiting body. When it actually rips open the tree and rips the bark open, it will actually be all white. Here on the inside of the tree, the sapwood of the tree would be white, porous, and it would be basically sporulating. There's a lot of different bugs and larvae and beetles that feed on it, and they are actually the vectors that transport the spores and infect other trees. It is extremely rare to capture a chaga fruiting body in its active state while it's emitting spores.
It's only been captured on video a handful of times. Other than that, there's just like a handful of photographs. We have two massive pieces of chaga growing on one massive yellow birch tree. This is Betula alleganiensis, the golden birch tree, also called the yellow birch tree. The yellow birch tree is specific to the Appalachian Mountains of the northeastern United States. They don't have the golden birch tree in Russia. They don't have the golden birch tree in Alaska. That is the special sauce of our Adirondack chaga. Chaga is superior when it comes from the yellow birch tree.
Birch Boys harvesters tend to agree that the vast majority of chaga that we find comes from yellow birch trees that are at least 8 to 10 inches in diameter. Yellow birch trees on average take about 9 years to grow just 1 inch in lateral trunk expansion. In other words, most of our chaga in the Adirondacks is growing on trees that are over 100 years old. For a large old-growth tree, this life cycle may take over 10 years, and it produces large pieces of chaga. That's why the largest pieces of chaga come from large old-growth birch trees. Smaller, younger birch trees do not produce much chaga at all. In rare occasions, Inonotus obliquus is able to infiltrate a young birch tree and kill it and reproduce without producing a chaga sclerotia at all. That is how chaga is able to infiltrate a young upcoming forest without even being noticed by people. This underscores a really important lesson. For wild chaga to thrive and be truly abundant and harvestable, it needs birch tree hosts that are over 100 years old. Once these trees are gone, there's no way to replace them in a lifetime.
Garrett received an email from a like-minded young man similarly inspired by birch trees and chaga, Ben Bohemier. Ben is a university student studying chaga's mating system for his master's thesis. Ben went viral on Instagram after posting his discovery of a chaga fruiting body on a yellow birch tree. The two found each other online and decided to connect to discuss ways they might cooperate with one another along their shared quest to understand and expose this fascinating fungus to the world.
How old are you, Ben?
I am 24 at the moment.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. I'm at Lakehead University in Thunder Bay, Ontario. I study chaga and its reproductive cycle, currently doing my master's. And sometimes I like to consider chaga the gold of the north. It's a circumboreal fungus. It's wrapped around the globe in a big band that we call the boreal forest. Chaga doesn't get nearly as large as in the Adirondacks. Like, you guys have huge chaga. It's gigantic. Ours usually doesn't get that big. It's a very strange organism. It's got this very odd way of reproducing that is just so cool. And I've really just kind of been, driven by this idea that chaga is in some way unique. I'm really interested in these fringe, kind of off the cuff, strange ways that fungi can reproduce. Chaga has something incredibly unique to say about it. When you look at fungi and their reproduction, we kind of have, a pretty good understanding of how mushrooms reproduce. Fungi release spores, or mushrooms release spores in the air, and then these spores kind of land, and then they germinate, and a single spore isn't enough. Another spore needs to interact with another one, then they exchange genetic material, kind of sperm and egg, so to speak, and then from there, they can form mushrooms and sexually reproduce. And this compatibility between different spores is the mating system. And for chaga, we had no idea what this was. You need to understand how something reproduces before you do anything with it, I think.
On that note, like, what can you tell us about what you found, about chaga's life cycle that is, like, unique?
Usually spores require another partner, another spore that's compatible to they meet each other when they exchange genetic material and they reproduce. But some fungi are able to reproduce from a single spore, so they can just do everything themselves. And chaga can do that as well. So it doesn't necessarily need to interact with another spore. That can be a really good strategy if you're a fungus that only reproduces once in however long it's infecting a birch tree. What's also odd is when you have that, when it reproduces from a single spore, you're getting, a choke and like a genetic bottleneck, because it's not, the whole point of sexual reproduction is to
mix the genes.
combine our genetics, So then what it also does is that it also will produce spores that need a partner to reproduce. So it's reproducing these in two different ways. And so it's kind of either combining this ability for it to reproduce from a single spore, but also to increase genetic diversity at the same time. And then what's even weirder is that sometimes spores can be completely empty, it seems. They can have no nuclei, which I think is maybe an error, or maybe it isn't, I don't know. And then sometimes they can have up to 3 nuclei or up to 4 nuclei, which is incredibly odd. So we don't really see that a lot in mushrooms. Almost at the moment, I've only encountered about 2 to 3 other species that I know of that can have that level, unlike the whole mushroom kingdom. At the moment, but probably not restricted to chaga. I think we just have to look harder, because the second you look harder with mycology, you tend to find things, because it's such a huge field. But at the moment, this is one of the few that does that. And what's really strange is that as the spores are being produced over time, the amount of nuclei in a spore will change over time. So that's what I'm looking at right now. That's quite complicated, but that is my thesis. I think that the harvestable chaga in areas where it's getting harvested a lot does have a threat to it. So I think that as a resource will become more and more scarce. So I'm really only speaking of chaga in that sense as it relates as a resource. So as a resource, I think it can be affected, and wild chaga will become more valuable over time, because they can lab cultivate like mycelium, not the actual wild chaga. They can do other stuff, but usually when you get capsules with chaga mycelium, it's just chaga mycelium. It's not the actual sclerotium. But then in terms of the organism, I don't think it cares at all. I don't think it really is bothered.
We're moving through 4,000 pounds of chaga per year right now, dry weight. So that's like 8,000 pounds of fresh chaga per year. It's definitely made me think a lot more about sustainability. Chaga in nature are obviously very abundant where we are, but for our growth, I'm starting to think about it more in terms of not just double sales, but 10 times sales, 100 times sales. Where are we going to be at 10 years from now? It's becoming a more specialized skill, so it's not like it's harder to find chaga. The number of harvesters we work with has actually shrunk to a small handful of people that I trust a lot, that really know the forest and are willing to go deep into the woods. I do think a lot of the chaga that's easy to find right off the side of the roads, the obvious chaga that you can see driving your car, that's kind of been taken, so we don't really have as many people bringing us chaga anymore, but I think that's a good thing. I'm thinking forward a lot, and I've realized I probably don't want to sell this company. I really just see myself building this into a permanent force in the industry, and what I want to do ultimately is purchase land and basically inoculate thousands of birch trees and manage the upgrowth of new healthy birch trees, but form a wild chaga farm. Because the problem that I see right now is that land management, private land management in the Adirondacks in northern New York or anywhere, is all timber centric. So they're totally basing the value of the land based on the value of the trees. And it's because the way that you make money from the land is by cutting down and selling the trees, like yellow birch trees. And from harvesting yourself, how much of the chaga, you just brought 75 pounds of chaga, how much of that came from yellow birch trees?
Yeah, almost all of it.
Almost all of it. And so almost all the chaga we sell comes from yellow birch trees. The selective timber harvesting protocols right now, which are state sponsored, you can get an 80% tax abatement if you own over 50 acres of land, if you commit to harvesting the timber within 30 years. So this is state incentivized. Selective timber harvesting protocols for yellow birch trees include any yellow birch tree over 8 inches in diameter or any that have a dead top. And that's a pretty gray way of defining a tree. So out of the chaga that you bring, right, how much of it comes from a birch tree that is over 8 inches in diameter with a dead top?
All of it.
All of it. It literally indicates every chaga-bearing yellow birch tree. You take that on top of chaga harvesting, on top of deforestation or whatever people are going to do with their land, and it's kind of scary. You know, it's a scary picture for chaga. I don't actually fear that chaga is ever going to be endangered, and there's going to be chaga spores and chaga lurking everywhere in the deepest parts of the forest that I have no doubt chaga is going to be just fine. But harvestable chaga that people can use, I do think is going to dwindle. And so that's concerning not only like for my company, but just, you know, for the best interests of people. I think it would be very sad if people didn't have access to real wild chaga and we instead use this fake lab-grown bullshit.
And what I would like to do is just call some customers randomly and hear straight from them. So.
Hello, Jerome speaking.
Hey Jerome, this is Garrett Kopp with Birch Boys Chaga. I'm the founder of Birch Boys. How are you?
I'm terrific. Hold on 1 second. Let me let this other call off.
Oh yeah.
Hold on. That's really funny. You called me because I'm like, okay, I've got to take some chaga today. the chaga cactus. I've already had 2 cups of chaga. Your chaga chunks are the absolute best tasting. They taste freaking pure. Everybody else has the Siberian chaga. Siberian chaga is kind of tricky in the sense that you might get some good Siberian chaga, but a lot of it ain't good.
Then also, do they let it sit around wet before they dry it? Does it mold? Because that's going to affect.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think there's also just fake chaga on the market as well. So
fake chaga, are those conchs, what they call conchs, or what do you call it, Messina?
Oh, the mycelium. Is that what you're talking about?
No, not mycelium based, but because there's no, I guess there are mycelium based chaga chunks.
Chaga itself is not mycelium, but there are companies taking chaga spores and he grows it on like brown rice and makes chaga mycelium indoors. And like he is making, I think, capsules and liquid extracts or tinctures from the chaga mycelium, which to me, I don't even feel it's fair to call that chaga. It's the mycelium.
I've used it. I have used it, as I've been using chaga for years. But I'm telling you, it doesn't. It's not real chaga. It has different properties. Chaga is not real chaga. They have similar properties, but it ain't the same.
It's not chaga, the stuff that you're seeing in drinks. All these companies that sell these like trendy mushroom coffee supplement beverages, they're just fake.
But we've seen that over and over in other industries. You've seen it in salt, you've seen it in honey, you've seen it...
Olive oil.
Yeah. I mean, so why would it be any different?
I guess it's the same. This is one I happen to be witnessing very firsthand, and it's sad, you know. And it is different because like you don't use olive oil to fight cancer, right? That is one way that I think it's different. There are people who literally have been failed for one reason or another by Western medicine, and they turn to things like chaga because they literally have no choices left.
Good, how are you?
Very good. I have a story to tell you.
Okay, I'm listening.
There are 2 doctors that I deal with, and they both say I'm beating all the odds with beating this cancer. They don't have anyone that has the type of cancer I have that's still alive after a period of time I've spent with this cancer. I went to my oncologist a week ago Friday, and he asked if I was still doing mushroom. I tried to tell all of them I'm doing the mushroom stuff. Said, yes, I'm still doing the mushroom. And they took a CT scan, and he said, all of the cancers in your body have stopped growing. There's no cancer that's active anymore. We don't know what's happening. We don't know what's going on. But he says, you keep eating the mushrooms.
And you can look this up and you know it, you are aware of it. But, you know, the Mayo Clinic, the Cleveland Clinic, Johns Hopkins University, they all subscribe to, out of their integrative medicine departments, medical mushroom. It helps me maintain health. And the other thing, most people that take chaga may not realize it, but I apply it externally on my skin, and it helps your body. It helps wounds heal externally, also internally. Here's the other use I have of chaga. I guarantee you probably have never heard of this. I'll use a chaga nasal rinse. Absolutely. Chaga nasal rinse. Spray it up my nostrils or take a small amount of, just like in a neti pot. You gotta exercise. Oh, and by the way, with the environmental factors today in our society, you cannot get there if you're not doing something to supplement as an adjunct to your health. Chaga needs to be a part of that, and or lion's mane. But I tell my friends all the time, I always tease my friends. They say, hey, because my friends are my age. I said, you know what? That's the third time you've mentioned that to me. I said, have you, and I might be teasing. Yeah. I said, you're repeating yourself quite often. Folks have to understand what age is, how to deal with age, and then you got to do more and more things to remain vital. That means actually things as stupid as mindfulness.
A couple years ago, developed cancer. I had to have surgery to have it removed. It was an aggressive cancer, carcinosarcoma. It was a month or so after I had found out that I had it that I had my surgery, and the doctors were scared of what they were going to find when they got in there. But when they opened me up and did the surgery, they found that the cancer had not moved. And I believe with all my heart that the chaga stopped it dead in its tracks. I also believe that it is good for overall health. Beautiful hair and wonderful skin. And I give chaga a lot of the credit for that as well.
I truly appreciate the work that you're doing out here educating about chaga, because I think it is one of the most unique substances on planet Earth. There's a very wide range of benefits. The studies of the betulinic acid and the other triterpenes, I think immediately, we're looking at things that can create apoptosis, or they're immune enhancing for certain white blood cells to help, dismantle abnormal growths or even conquer idiopathic illnesses. I'm not a medical professional, I'm an herbalist. I understand anatomy. I'm not giving you medical advice, but there's a lot of research, a lot of studies, a lot of firsthand testimonies that I've seen utilize this and share their experiences with me, and then share their lab work with me after they go speak to a qualified healthcare professional. And it's very clear that this has an enhancing effect on the immune response. There's a gap that I'm watching close quickly between the holistic community and the, traditionally trained doctors, which I'm happy to be like on the forefront, bridging this gap. My old page is since deleted, as I was legitimately using astragalus, goji berry, and chaga, and watching people recover or not get sick. Nurses, people with 5 or 6 pre-existing health conditions in their 70s. I was seeing this stuff happen. I'm like, yo, this stuff is powerful. Like, this can really help a lot of people.
I do believe that you can actually feel the mushrooms. You have to go into it with intention, and you have to use it consistently. It's not like you're going to take chaga and all of a sudden feel different. Some people do, but if you use it every day for 2 weeks, you have a much better chance. It's not going to work like a medication where it's going to kick in and you're going to feel it. It's a lifestyle change for sure.
How can you differentiate what's the better product, or what's something for somebody new, just wanting to just figure this out?
A very simple tip I could give to anyone is ask for an accredited certificate of analysis from a US-based lab, which is just going to be a lab report verifying a certain claim. Look on the back of the label, look for the words mycelium, myceliated oats. If they're talking about chaga, and they say it's Inonotus obliquus, which is chaga's Latin name, and then in parentheses, myceliated oats and brown rice flour, that should signal to you that they're growing it in some sort of indoor setting. You can't cultivate chaga indoors. I mean, chaga is a sclerotia, which is a defensive organ formed by parasitic fungi to protect itself from a living host. In chaga's case, that may be a 100 or 200-year-old birch tree. So it's that war, it's a literal war between chaga and the birch tree that makes chaga so valuable and medicinal.
If we define the problem, right, the problem I think is that yellow birch trees take an extremely long time to grow. A lot of these land parcels are being sold to the state. And for me, who only has access to private land, you know, I have no control over the land unless I purchase land. So I think the solution for me to build a regenerative model for chaga that also stays true to the authenticity and the integrity of the benefits. You know, remembering chaga is a sclerotia. It literally synthesizes these medicinal compounds to protect itself from a living tree that is 100 years old and dynamic and powerful. And so you can't do that indoors. You can't create a sclerotia inside, you know, a man-made environment. So I think that we need to basically buy land and steward the land for the upgrowth of birch trees, and we need to inoculate the trees with chaga. So, you know, that starts by finding sporoids or reproductive organs of chaga where it's killed a tree and producing spores, harvest the spores, use those to inoculate something like grain or birch sawdust, and then literally make dowels and plug the trees and wait 10 years, come back and harvest it. It's very forward thinking. It's going to take a long time. This is going to have to happen. Otherwise, we will run out. We get a lot of our chaga right now from loggers, you know, as they're cutting the trees. And what I'm starting to realize is this is a moment in time, really, and that I'm experiencing. I learned about chaga and I had the opportunity to start this business because, you know, there's a lot of people coming across it within an arm's length away. It's right within their reach. I'm a beneficiary of it as much as it will be the downfall of this business and opportunity. It created the golden opportunity, and it's going to be the same swift death unless I can figure out a regenerative model.
Chaga's future is uncertain, but it doesn't have to be that way. Cultivation of wild chaga provides a beacon of light for sustainability. Garrett's research was starting to lead him to the answers. He wanted to know more about how he could ensure he was putting his best foot forward in the march towards sustainable chaga. So he sought out an expert from Baltimore, an educator named Garrett Kopp, who specializes in microbiology.
Can you hear me, Eric?
There we go. I had to press all the buttons.
Is it okay if I record this?
Yeah, no worries, Garrett. Yeah.
Good. I'd love to just like hear you talk about like the philosophy of what the process is of the inoculating.
I mean, at the end of the day, you know, chaga is a fungus, and fungus starts with mycelium, and the idea is quite simply to introduce the mycelium to the tree. Now that happens naturally in the environment when the spores are able to move from a fruiting body to another habitable location, and they germinate naturally, start to produce mycelium, and the mycelium then grows in the tree. Ultimately, you know, that produces the sclerota of the chaga. What we were trying to do then is essentially take that first part and sort of do that first part in the lab in a controlled way so that we can get a really nice vigorous strain or a nice vigorous culture of mycelium that then we can directly introduce to the tree with the idea then at that point nature is going to take its course. This is very similar to what is done in shiitake logs and other, you know, gourmet mushroom species. And really that's all we're trying to do, is we're just trying to take that knowledge that we learned from gourmets and apply it to chaga. And, you know, I don't see any reason why it won't be a successful endeavor based on a really good culture. We're going to have to, like, I think you and I have talked about this, you're going to have to stop just getting it off of random trees whenever you find it, and you're going to have to do it much more sustainably and deliberately. That's not only going to support the biodiversity of the region, and it's going to keep a lid on any sort of like pressure on the fungus itself, but it'll also, make any sort of economies that come out of that sustainable, or at least, programmable. But I've always had a really, strong fascination for growing mushrooms. And during COVID, my wife and I were like, sort of locked down. Let me just spend a bunch of money and build a lab, and let's grow mushrooms. That's going to be fun. And then, we did that. And then, we're growing some lion's mane and some oysters in a little bitty tent. And I'm like, all we have to do now to turn this into a business is build a grow room. We've got everything else going on for us. We dialed back on the gourmet mushroom growing bit. And what the other thing we had been doing is leveraging our chemistry knowledge and to do mushroom extractions. And so we were doing it lion's mane extractions, and I had been growing cordyceps as well, and doing cordyceps extractions. And I was just like, well, what else could we do? Well, there's a lot of good things to hear about this chaga business. And so that's why, ultimately, Garrett, that's why I called you. I was like, I need to get some chaga, and, you're well represented in the marketplace. And so I mean, that's what I did with it. I made some tincture out of it.
Well, so, I mean, if we could just talk about some of the questions I have about the process of this. I've plugged 5 trees so far. I've just kind of picked, 6 feet, 7 feet high up on the tree. I found difficulty as I drill the hole. I'm actually then melting the wax and trying to pour the wax onto the tree. And I'm thinking maybe there's got to be a better tool to use.
Yeah, a paintbrush, a little paintbrush.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, and so we would just kind of we had a little camping stove, and we would just take an old pot out there, put it on the camping stove to occasionally heat up the wax. But then essentially we're just taking some old ruined paintbrush and just dabbing it on with that.
Do you think it's critical that it's totally airtight sealed?
If you're talking about this sap running and it's really moist and wet and it's just kind of flowing over that hole, and that might be a pretty good spot to be in as well, because one of the things that that kind of got me excited about the idea that the sap would be running is that now all of a sudden you have water and sugar in the spot where you just put mycelium. And what does mycelium grow on? Water and sugar. I do inoculations at several points in the year, because right now you don't really know what's going to be the best spot. And you might find that after the sap runs, that'll be a little bit better. Maybe because the sap isn't running, but there's still all this residual sugar that's sort of just laying on the tree. That might be the best time too. You don't want to introduce too many variables. Chaga grows on birch trees without any intervention from humans. And so the first job is to figure out how to get chaga to grow on trees with the minimal amount of intervention, which ostensibly involves introducing the fungus to the tree.
And then how often would you I'm thinking quarterly in terms of the timeline to go back and check these trees, maybe once 2 weeks after inoculation, but then quarterly, every 3 months. Or do you have any thoughts on that? Because I mean, chaga, it takes a long time to grow. I'm looking at this and I can see at least 3 years of annual growth rates just to here. So I don't know, maybe it's.
And that's the sclerota though. That's not the mycelium, right?
Right.
I think that you should go back and check it regularly, and I would say no less than once a month, because what you're trying to identify is clear evidence of mycelial growth. Because if the mycelium is growing, then it's not far-fetched to say that then you've successfully introduced the mycelium to the tree. And if the tree has been successfully inoculated with mycelium, then the next logical thought is, well, then eventually it'll form a sclerota. And so I don't think what you should expect to see is little chaga, knobs forming at all these locations. But I'm hoping that by the middle of the summer, that you clearly see the spots where the mycelium has started to take off, and you can at least feel a little bit more, rest a little bit more assured that you do actually have mycelium now running in the tree.
So now, the Birch Boys had their plan. Garrett felt confident in his findings, and everything leading up to this point had made it clear that there was really only one thing left to do. We wanted to learn all we can, so we thought there was no better person to ask than a founding member of the Forest Stewards Guild. Ross Morgan was so enthusiastic and thrilled to help provide more background. He has been involved with forest management his entire life, so we knew we were asking the right person. We also wanted to show Ross firsthand the inoculation process and see if his years of knowledge could provide even more expert insight.
Well, I learned about what we would call chaga as in studying fungi in the forest. From the forestry aspect in the, say, 60s and 70s and 80s, it was seen as a destructive force to growing yellow birch trees. So in the thinning process, if you saw a chunk of chaga, you said, well, let's mark that tree to be thinned out. I was intrigued by it because it's a funny looking thing, and I've seen them, 2 feet long sticking out of a tree. Then when I ran into the information about how it had been used as a medicinal, I was intrigued the other way, is how do you cultivate it? How do you keep it growing in the forest as a part of the forest? Because it is. And I started reading a little bit more about chaga, which I was interested in the cultivation of the cultures of Russia, Soviet Union. And I remember reading the native people were saying that it wasn't just a preventative, it was a cure for cancer. Now you start to turn to say, maybe the chaga of the tree is more important than the log that's in it. But the answer is really you can grow them both.
So we're gonna inoculate a birch tree with chaga, or try to anyway. So we're just using a little drill bit here. We have our chaga spawn that we've prepared. And we're gonna do this while the sap is running. We know chaga loves the sapwood. So it's an experiment. We don't really know how long it's gonna take, but it could take a year or two before we really see if there's any chaga growth. So this is tree number 5 that we've inoculated so far, or we'll soon have. That should be pretty. Oh wow, I didn't realize how deep that goes. See the sap running? That is what we want.
Look at that.
So we're gonna get that in there. Soy wax, which is easier to melt at lower temperatures than other wax, and it's natural. So give that a minute and we'll see if it seals. We might need to do another layer of wax, but the idea is just to trap that sap in there so it stays moistureful, and so the chaga can grow on that sap, feed off of it. And this is the theory, we don't really know if this is going to work, but this is definitely chaga mycelium that is successfully growing. It's fully colonized these birch dowels, so there's no reason it shouldn't work theoretically. Spores penetrate trees. The genus Inonotus means to penetrate. So we're actually going a step further than spreading spores to trees. We're taking spores, introducing them to sterilized grain, fully colonizing that. So we're starting with a stronger type of a medium than a spore. This is highly reproductive colonized fungus, and then we're taking that and putting it on birch dowels. So there's no reason this shouldn't work.
Nature is always going to find a way to produce and do what it has to do to make the good things. And my advice is to let nature do what it has to do. And as a harvester of chaga, I would do what I have to do to make sure that nature can do what she has to do. There's no way that we will ever be more powerful than she is. And in my native culture, in my heritage, it is said, take what you need. There's plenty, but don't get greedy.
Over the past 12 months, we've been touring numerous properties, but one has really caught our interest as a prospective chaga farm. This is a 155-acre parcel of land located in the northern Adirondacks with thousands of old-growth birch trees and plenty of young, upcoming birch trees as well. There's also streams and wetland features and plenty of existing chaga. This is the land we intend to purchase for inoculating and stewarding for long-term wild chaga forest farming.
Piece of property that we want to purchase, and we're going to call the real estate agent who we've been working with, who's kind of been rooting for us to come up with the funds to buy this. So we're just going to give her a call. I know there was another buyer interested, so I'm just kind of curious to see.
Hello.
Hey Shelly, it's Garrett with Birch Boys.
Hi Garrett, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
Crazy.
Has there been any interest from that other buyer?
I think that my buyer, or my seller even is, I just spoke with him today and he's like, I'm waiting on Garrett. I'm waiting on Garrett. I think soon is to keep you because, you're going to let him use the land, walk the land, even if he might never do it, you know what I mean? But just to him, that's enough push for him to want you to have it.
Cool.
He wants to do the owner financing with you. Pick that contract up soon.
Okay, sounds good.
Go enjoy your walk. I can't wait to hear about it.
Thank you.
Okay, take care.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.
We're looking for a chaga Polaroid.
During our most recent visit to the land, we even found an active chaga fruiting body. Land costs a lot of money. This is where we need your help. If you want to take part in helping us form a regenerative, sustainable supply chain for the future of wild chaga, here are 2 ways you can do it. The first way is to just purchase our products at birchboys.com. There's a link in the description of this video with a 25% discount, and the code for that discount is also Forever Wild Chaga, all one word, all caps lock. But again, you can click the link in the description of this video, and that way the discount will automatically apply at checkout. You can also click the link to donate to our PayPal crowdfunding campaign that is starting with the release of this film. So there's 2 ways to donate directly, or you can purchase our products. Spread the word, get it out there, tell your friends and family about this, and if you liked this video, please comment, like, share, and subscribe to my channel.